If you want to learn how to get started with QGIS, you've come to the right place. My name is Justin, I've been a GIS consultant for 3 years, and today I'll be showing you how to work with QGIS. I also run a school community, it's school.com/map. If you want to learn more, check it out, you can do that later as well. So, why even use QGIS? So QGIS, first of all, it is a desktop GIS, so you'll be able to do everything you need to do on the desktop. In other words, you'll literally have an app on your desktop where you can just run all of your spatial analysis, do all of your mapping tasks, and by the end of it, you have a cool map. QGIS is also free, so that's a great part about QGIS. All of the other software, or most of the other software out there, you'll have to pay for. So you'll have to pay an expensive license, an expensive course, whereas you can also just watch this video and use free software. So, I mean, you do you, have your own choices. And QGIS also is open source. In other words, anything that is built in QGIS will be accessible to all users, and you don't have to pay extra for extra features or whatever. And whenever a feature is missing, you can actually build it yourself or have it be built yourself. Maybe there's 20 other people out there that actually have the same issue and you can split the bill on the development cost. So that's a great thing about QGIS. So free open source desktop GIS, I think it's the future, but make your own decisions there. Either way, we'll just dive into what you can do with QGIS in this video. By the way, if you stick to the end, you'll actually be able to build any map as long as you actually put your mind to it. The one actual issue in the GIS niche is everyone just tries to learn new skills, do new things, whatever, and they're all over the place. But after all, we're just trying to solve a problem with a map. We're making a map, and somebody's problem is solved through that map. So build it with a purpose and make sure that whenever you're stuck on something, just make sure you keep working on that project. Don't get distracted. Just ask AI to help you whenever you're stuck. Ask ChatGPT, go to videos like these, and just actually have that mindset like, okay, I'm going to have this problem, but I will solve it. I will get back to those videos and I'll just solve my problem my own way, because this skill is valuable and a lot of people underestimate that. But it's just such a shame if you actually do not actually do the work, or you just give up and don't commit, whereas it's actually not that hard, but it just looks hard on the face. Anyways, what will we cover today? By the way, if you want to learn more about GIS and map making, as well as AI and coding, you can join this community for free down below. I hope to see you inside. So we will look into the setup and the interface of QGIS. We'll also look into data management. We'll look into mapping and styling. And we'll look into spatial analysis and a little bit about web maps as well. So let's build. Starting out, we're going to go to this website, qgis.org. And this website actually has all of the information that you need. And you can actually download the website here. And you can actually download the application here. So as soon as we're on the website, we actually see what QGIS is, spatial visualization and decision-making tools for everyone. And we have a download button. If we click the download button, we have a few options here. So you can also donate to QGIS. You can also choose from different versions. I'm going to skip it for now, but I'll do it later. Long-term version, and we have a latest version. Right now, I am using the LTR. Reason for that is I am using QGIS with a bunch of other apps. And for that reason, it makes sense to use the long-term release. So this is the version that I'm choosing. However, you could also use this one. I recommend using the 3.34, and I recommend using the 3.34. I actually have it installed already. So right here we have, so as soon as you have QGIS installed, it shall display somewhere on your desktop, somewhere in your Windows Explorer, or somewhere on your homepage. But in my case, I actually have it pinned to my taskbar. And indeed, it shows long-term release. And usually it takes up to a minute to start. I mean, it kind of depends on the processing power and the compute of your laptop as well. So this is where we start out. You'll probably see something more or less similar to this. But take into account the visualization and the amount of buttons here in these two bars, you'll probably have a few less than I have, because I have a few plugins and whatnot installed. Regardless, this is the interface. And in case you want anything changed, we can edit that later. For now, just click New Empty Project and go to Plugins. Then click Manage and Install Plugins. and search for the Quick Map Services plugin. I have it installed already once again, but you can click Install Plugin right here. In my case, it says Reinstall Plugin. And then you should be seeing these 3 buttons, or 2 or 3 buttons, and one of which has a plus. You click that and click OSM and then click OSM Standard. And now we have our base map. So we actually have a map to have some sort of point of reference for what we're looking at. You can navigate by just clicking and dragging and zooming in and zooming out. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. At the top here we have basically our taskbar, which has options for layers, settings, plugins, vector layers, raster, spatial analysis. These 2 are database, connections, web services. So indeed we're using one of those, the Quick Map Services. This is another way to navigate to that plugin. As for the interface, now we can just zoom in and out on the map. So as for the interface, this is our map. We can zoom in and out. It's pretty self-explanatory. On the left, it will show our layers. On the right, we have a processing toolbox. Currently, we don't need it, so I would suggest just click it away for the sake of keeping everything smooth and simple. And we have, well, these 2 toolbars, but to be honest, you can actually ignore those at the moment as well. While we navigate, you can actually see at the bottom there's coordinates. So whenever I'm clicking somewhere, I can actually copy those coordinates as well. And you actually see where those coordinates are. They keep moving with the mouse unless I click, and they'll stay static for the extents of the actual map. So the frame in which the map is showing up. I would suggest just use the mouse. Scale also is dynamic. So whenever I zoom in into a place, it will actually show us at what scale I'm looking at the map. And there's a few other options there that you don't really need to know about. Anyways, on to the next step, finding GIS data. So GIS being Geoinformation System and QGIS being a Geoinformation System. Search for something along these lines for your city. So in my case, I'm looking for London, not because I'm from London, because the data portal will actually be in English. So as you can see right now, I get a few results. And what I would suggest is just click something that has something around maps or spatial data in it. Right now we're looking at this data portal by the London Data Store, by the Mayor of London or the London Assembly. I don't exactly know if this is like the municipality or the city or whatever, but what I do know is that there's some open data here. We have a few options. So here there's a few formats, and we're actually looking for spatial data. And spatial data in 9 out of 10 cases will actually be displayed as a shapefile, a GeoJSON, or a GeoPackage. So I'm clicking the shapefile right now, and what I'm currently seeing is the London Brownfields site review, updated 11 years ago. So to be honest, this is a bit too old of a data set to actually use as an example. Just quickly, I'll try another one. This seems a little more modern. We have base maps, budget, transportation, and a whole lot of other things. But I actually see a few things that resemble maps. And here we actually see a button with a map gallery. That's kind of where we want to be. So let's see what that drives for us as a result. I'm kind of seeking through this while I'm at it as well. And honestly, it's only now that I'm realizing this is the city of London in Canada and not in the UK, but either way, that's fine. We kind of understand where we're looking at. Regardless, let's just grab one of the datasets. So as of right now, you actually see buildings, contour text, a few other datasets as well. And what we're looking for in particular is something that is a map. So I actually found a result by London, where we actually have a bunch of spatial data. The easiest way to identify is because there's actually a map on here with layers. So that's what we're looking to do as well. And what I'm seeing right now is a few options. So here there's a protection, good growth, borrow layers, and context. And it's all planning data. In other words, it's all used in the urban/spatial planning of the City of London. That's the context in which this data is published, at least. So I'll try and download it. And as soon as I click download, this is the data store that we then look at. I'm clicking GeoPackage right now because with the GeoPackage, I'm 100% sure that it is actual spatial data. So it has a location and we can display it on the map. And the same thing would go in case you're using a shapefile, a KML or KMG, or a GeoJSON. All of those files are valid and you can actually use them on a map or to display on the map. What I will do right now is I will just look for an interesting layer to have an example. And what I'll do is actually I will click this layer right here, town center boundaries. And what we should have here is a polygon map. In other words, it should define the areas within the town center. So I'll click this geo package right here. And as you can see, it has the projection EPSG 27700, which is the British National Grid. That will become more clear in a bit. So you can download this one, the geo package. You can also opt for the shapefile. A geo package usually is a little easier to use in my opinion, because a shapefile inherently is a bit of an older format that actually contains 4 files within a zip file. At least if it is a proper shapefile. And the geo package is a single file. You can also opt for a KML or a KMZ, which is a single file, or a GeoJSON, which is also a single file. So that is my preference. However, this is a smaller file, obviously, so do whatever suits you. In this case, I'll go for the geo package. So I'll download it. And as you can see, it will appear right here. We can just drag and drop it into the QGIS file. And now we should have this layer right here. So it appears in our layers, in our dataset, in our layer menu. It appears in our layer menu, and make sure it appears on top of the OpenStreetMap. Sometimes it can occur that the layer is below it and then you won't see it. So make sure it is at the top. So you can just drag and drop that as well. Right click the layer and then click zoom to layers. And you'll actually see that it is located somewhere in the sea right here, which is not ideal. So actually right click this layer, click layer CRS, and then click set layer CRS. And what we're doing here is we're actually defining the projection in which we want to see the data. And as we previously saw, is we need this EPSG code. So 27700, that's the one that was appearing on the website. So I'm selecting that and I'll click OK. Then it is going to transform it because in this case, we're using a different projection. So it needs a small transformation. Usually you can just click OK, it will use the top one and that will be fine. Then right click this, click zoom to layers, and you'll see the layer right now actually appears on the base map on the right location. So this is ideal. What we want to do now, or what we can do now, is zoom around. We can look at the layer. We can also click these buttons to zoom in and zoom out. So I can do it this way, but ideally you just use this hand, so to pan the map. You just zoom in and zoom out with your mouse. Another option that you do have is to actually identify the features. So right now we just see the polygons, we just see the geometries. But the geometries are not really the information. The information is also what is stored in that geometry. So if I click this button right here, identify features, and then I click one of those polygons, or in your case, maybe you're working with points or with lines, you actually see that the geometry has information stored on it. So right now we see these are all of our attributes. So this is basically the tabular data that is stored on that polygon. In other words, the information as opposed to the location. And what you can see is there's a classification, a FID, there is some first added date, so we actually know when this information was first stored and when it was last updated, who this data belongs to, and a bunch of other things. That data you can also use to identify where the data comes from. You can also use it to identify how large the file or how large the object is. But take into account, not all of this information will be the same for each data set, obviously. So your planning department may look at completely different data or display completely different data, save completely different data than the planning department in London. And for that reason, you need to actually make sure that you're aware that this can change and can be different for each data set. That being said, this is the data that we're working with right now. You can copy it as well with this button. And there's a few other options that you have, but just click it away for now. So that's something cool that you can do with that data. And something that we haven't done yet right now, and kind of forgot to be honest, is we're working in a project. So this project, it needs to be saved in case you actually want to reopen it again later. Because I can make all sorts of edits when it's the same as working in Word or Excel. If I don't save my changes and I just click the file away, it will just restore to what it was before I started editing everything. So you can click project, you can click save as, that's what I would do, and you can actually store it at a location where you would want to see it. And what I would do is click Control Save As, and then you can actually save your project as a file, so a QGIS file, which will store all of the information, and in a folder where you would like to see it. So in my case, I have a GIS folder where I save these projects, so I can call it london.qgis and or .qgz. It will save, and you actually see it appear right here in case it has actually been saved. That being said, it's a possibility. You don't actually have to do this, but in case you actually want to save your project, make sure to do it. Also, as you can see right now, if I hover over this layer, it is actually being saved in my downloads, because obviously I drag and drop this from my downloads. I need to make sure that all of these layers that I want to display are in that same folder or within that project. So I can actually navigate to that folder in my Windows Explorer. And for example, I could save it within this project, and then it would actually reopen as soon as I want to reopen this file. So as you can see, it's right now reopening QGIS, but with this new project that I've actually saved. So it will actually reopen right now. We don't really have to do that. So just make sure that these layers are actually saved in a place where you don't remove them. It doesn't really matter if they're in a different folder, but it does matter that you do not delete them. So in my case, I occasionally delete all of my downloads because I no longer need them, or I've stored them in a different place. And if I then delete them, then obviously my data is actually deleted. So the QGZ file is only a place that actually stores the links to your layers and the links to your files, but not actually the files itself. That being said, let's move on to the next step. We can actually right-click this layer and click Properties, and we'll see a few options right here. So currently it's opening this tab right here, which is about the symbology. And here we can edit the color of our layer. I can also make the modal a little bit bigger so that I actually have a little more room to see and a little more space to see what I'm actually looking at. Now if I click this drop down right here, I can actually select which color I want to use. So in my case right now it's all changing to blue, and as soon as I click apply, you'll see it appear in blue. What you can do as well, however, right now all of our layers are in blue, all of our objects are in blue, It's one layer and all of the objects within that layer are in blue. But within that layer we can also make a categorization or a graduation. So if in case I click categorized, I can select a value, which is one of those attributes that we're just looking at. And I can actually classify everything by one of those values. So in case I click classification, I can click classify, and these are the 4 classifications within the data. And if I then click apply, it will actually make a legend for us, coloring each of those objects of each of those districts by their respective type. So we have districts, international districts, major ones, and metropolitan ones. And then in case a district doesn't actually have data in it, for that attribute, it will display as purple, so as a separate color. In this case, that's all the other values basically. You can also remove one, so in case you do not want to see the metropolitan ones, you can click delete. The data will still be in the data set, but you won't no longer see the actual data. That being said, just click apply, then click OK, and it will disappear again. So now we actually have colored everything by the type of district that it is. Something that we may want to add, however, is labels. So if I do the same thing, I go to properties and I go to labels. Then here I can click single labels. And for example, I can do a site name as label, or I can use one of the other types of values as well. In my case, I'll go with the site name. Usually you actually use the name as a label, obviously, and we'll be able to completely change the formatting and the font and all of the other things. So in my case, I'll go for the, well, whatever font, to be honest, doesn't really matter. And you'll see the preview right here. And you can also use buffers. So in case you have like a white base map, but you want to display the text in white as well, you can use a black buffer, or the other way around. Maybe you use a black base map, dark base map, and you'll use the buffer in white. So This way you can actually make sure everything contrasts with each other. Click cancel in my case, or sorry, no, I click apply and then I click OK. And you'll see the labels pop up for each of those objects. However, now that I'm zoomed out pretty far, it doesn't really make sense to display the labels. So I can even make them scale dependent. So in case I click properties again, I can choose to make them scale dependent as well. So here we have rendering, we can go to scale dependency, and we can actually say we only want to see them as soon as we're at this zoom level or between these zoom levels, rather. Click apply again and click OK. So right now I'm not seeing any of those labels, and now I do see them, right? So that makes your map a little easier to read. Now, I'm not a cartographer, but actually make sure that your map is visible and everything actually makes sense, because you do not want too much information, yet you also do not want too little information. So actually make sure to be aware of that. So if I actually disable this layer, you'll see the same thing with the OpenStreetMap that I'm using right here. So this is technically the same thing, but it's stored somewhere on a database with a whole bunch of layers and labels. So as soon as I zoom in really far, you'll see more information becomes available, like this Parker course right here. As soon as I zoom out a little, it no longer appears. So these are also scale dependent base maps. So that's why I suggested you use this base map at the start of this video, because they've already done this for you, right? Anyways, that is one of our layers that we want to display. And the great thing about using an existing base map is it usually has the information and the subset of information that you already want to see. However, you can also use different sorts of base maps. So there's all sorts of different people that have cartography as their experience, and they are just busy all day with doing exactly this. Usually for us, or most people that work with QGIS, you're more so concerned with the data or the information. At least that's what it is for me. And I'm not too concerned with the cartography side of things, but that's something that you can do as well. I'm diving more into the information and trying to make business cases out of it, or trying to make them available and useful for decision making. And cartography is more so making the map useful to even use. So it's kind of a few disciplines that are coming together here. Going back to the main point, we've now styled our features, we've labeled them, and the next step is to actually view the attribute table. That's something we haven't done yet. So if I right click the layer, I can click open attribute table, and we'll actually be able to view the entire table. So you'll see these attributes once again, and each of those rows is one of our objects. What we can do as well is actually make it a little smaller, and we can click identify object, and this is basically what we're looking at a while ago. So this is more like the list of one object, and the table is more so kind of the other way around, where we are looking at it from a tabular perspective, and it's actually more or less the same thing. So we can click something here as well, and you'll see the same thing. You'll see something light up as the selection that we made. You can also zoom to it, so this way you can actually make a selection from the attribute table. You can also make a spatial selection. So whenever I'm doing something like this, I'm also making a selection of those objects. I can right click it, and I can choose to edit the layer as well. So I may want to, for example, change barking and redefine where the points are actually located. So without going too deep into the whole editing side of it, you can click this button right here, this yellow button, to actually enable editing. And you can click add polygon feature to draw in a new feature, for example. I actually selected a circle right now, which I don't want to do, but I can say draw something like this, and then right click, and we'll actually have a new polygon in there. And what you can see as well is that it actually is in dark blue, because I haven't started to actually add information to it. So obviously it's one of those all other values. However, to be honest, I do not want to have that in the data set, because this is not my data and I have no reason to change it, right? So In my case, that's not something I'm doing, but in case you're working with like project areas in your own data set, that's when you can do something like this. Maybe you want to change an area, make it bigger or make it smaller, or you want to edit it this way. That being said, let's actually just click this button right here and we'll just leave it there. It doesn't really matter. Let's toggle editing again and open up the attribute table again. Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, enabled editing again. So let's open the attribute table again. And something else that we can do is also edit from here. So we can toggle editing here, and I could say address. I could add in the address right here, right? So that's a cool thing about editing and using this data. You'll see a lot of data is usually lacking or missing. So here we have extra info. It doesn't really matter that it's empty. But for example, a source, all of these data, all of these areas are actually missing a source. And that's just one example, to be honest, and probably there's much more. But this way you can view it as pretty much an Excel sheet or as a map as well. That being said, let's just toggle editing again and discard. We do not need to save our changes. However, you could do this as well. File will be saved at the actual file location. So in my case, it's still in downloads right now, and that's where it actually will save the changes in that file. So you're actually editing a file here. That's actually something to be aware of as well. Each layer is a file, and one data set can actually be multiple layers. So in case I want to make another layer out of these town centers, but maybe I want to color everything by their size, for example, that is another way in which I can classify it. I would have two layers of the same data set, and if I then change the data for this layer, it would also appear in that other layer. Sounds a bit complicated maybe, but it really isn't. So let's actually give you an example. I'll duplicate this layer. And now we have this new layer, and we can click Properties and go to Styling. Then what we'll do right now is use a graduated styling. So here you can actually graduate it by a number, for example. So here we have the actual size of the property, or of each district basically. And we're able to, for example, use orange or some shades of orange as a color ramp. Let's see if we can do that. From white to orange. Let's use this. So color 1 is the actual base color of the lowest value. Color 2 will be the highest value, basically. So click OK, and then click Classify. And what it will now do is actually classify everything in a particular mode. Take into account there's several modes. So I can do a quantile, an equal interval, a few other things. You can do standard deviation in case you are really into the statistics. But either way, make sure to just play around with these to see which of them actually works best. Because it is quite possible that one really fits your needs or one doesn't really fit your needs, and then you can just navigate through them and see which works. And you can also select the amount of classes here on the right. So I'll select 5, for example, and this is the equal count that it will use. So each of these classes has the same amount of areas in them. Or if I use this one, the interval of each of those classes will be the same. So there's different ways in which you can classify that basically. I'm going to click apply. I'm going to click OK, and let's actually view what it's looking like. To be honest, you can't really see it very well from the map right now. So I'm going to go back into the properties again and select a different one. So let's actually use a color ramp that goes from white to red. I think that may benefit us in this case. We'll do that, yes. So apply, okay. And what we see right now is obviously the bigger areas display in red because they are bigger, and that's the value that we decided on styling it by. And the smaller areas display in white or pink because those are obviously smaller. To be honest, that may not really be the best visualization because you can pretty well see how large an area is, and it makes more sense to do population density in case you have an attribute like that, or something like this where you have a categorization and styling. But that being said, this is a really valuable thing to know about layers and styling. So basically now we have two visualizations of the same dataset. Next, let's do spatial analysis. That's going to be fun as well. What we'll first need is more data, and something that we want to do is kind of see how many buildings or trees, for example, are in each area. I'm just going to remove this layer for now, just to keep it a little accessible to understand what I'm doing. We have this layer with our boundaries and the colors. Just ignore the rest of what I'm doing right now. So we'll go back into the data portal, and right now this is where we were left off in the data portal. I'm going back, and let's see if we can find another interesting data set right now. It's a lot of zonal data I'm seeing. I'm not really seeing trees. So what I'm actually going to do is use an open data set. So just move back into QGIS. Because I couldn't really find a relevant data set, I'm actually going to try another one and try it through QGIS. So I'll actually add in something in the video right now. We're going to go to Vector. We're going to go to Processing and then click Toolbox. And now the toolbox that we previously clicked away is back. And here there's a lot of options for manipulating and editing your data as well, and doing spatial analysis. So that's the next step that we were going to go into. As of right now, we just have this one layer with all of our polygons, but we want to analyze within each of those polygons how many trees there are, for example. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go to the OpenStreetMap, to the QuickOSM toolbox. I'm searching for QuickOSM in the toolbox. Cannot find it. Tough. So we'll click Plugins and go to Manage and Install Plugins. Seems like it was still missing. Go to QuickOSM. And this is a plugin that will allow us to actually download a lot of data. Click Close, and now it should appear somewhere right here. You can also drag and drop it to match your interface in the way you would like your interface. Now it does appear in our processing toolbox. That being said, there's a few options that we have in there. So we can download the data from a not spatial query. We can download it from a query around an area, in an extent, in an area, and there's a few other things that we can do. What I'll do right now is I'll zoom to this layer, and now this is the extent that we're using. And I'll say I want to download all of the OSM data from a query in an extent. What I'll do, actually, I won't use trees, I'll use cafes. So I'll say amenity and then cafe. And something that is good to take into account in what I'm doing right now is you can actually go to the wiki by OpenStreetMap, which is wiki.openstreetmap.org, and you'll actually find all of the types of features and combinations that you can download. So you can actually say building, cars, or building, parking. So the key is building and the value is parking, and you'll see all of the buildings that have the purpose of parking your car in there. Going back to QGIS, this is what I'm doing right now, amenity cafe. That is also one of the combinations that you can use basically. And I'm clicking this button right here to set to current map extent the query. So I'll download all of the data, but within my map extent. Then I'll click run, and it will probably take a little while, but then we'll actually see a new data set with all of our cafes as points, maybe a few polygons. So there we go. As you can see, the execution was completed in 16 seconds. And I'll close the tool again. I now have 3 new layers. So I have a layer with points, a layer with polygons, and a layer with lines. Now I do not need the polygons and the lines, so I'm just selecting those with Control click, and then I'll click remove layer. And now this is the extent that we have downloaded all of the cafes from. We can actually rename the layer. Let's just call it cafes. If I want, I can even save it on my device by clicking the right click and then export, and then I'll click save features as, and I can download it as whatever. Just ignore that for now. And these are all of our points. Now what I want to do is check for how many points are in each boundary, how many points are in each district. So what I will do next is I'll go back into the processing toolbox, and I'll select count points in polygon. And what I can do now is I can select our polygons, our town center boundaries, and I can click points. I could even add a weight field and a class field. I don't have to do that now. And I'll click run. And now we've actually performed a spatial analysis. So what I have right now is we have a new layer with our polygons from our major districts. However, it now has a new column in it. So if I click the open attribute table again, we'll see a new column has been added with the number of points. And what I can do now is I can style this layer. So go to properties, then go to control feature symbology, and I can say graduated, click value number of points, and then use the color ramp that you would like. I'm just using the white to red one. That actually makes sense now. And next I'll click classify. And this is fine as a mode for now, but once again, you can play around with those. Click apply and click OK. And you actually see your map with those cafes and whether or not there are any cafes within that place. Now this actually doesn't really make sense as a legend, so I'll actually go back again, go to properties, and I'll say pretty breaks and click classify again, because this makes a little more sense. So the breaks actually make a little more sense. Now what I can do is like add in one more classification, for example, for 0 to 10. And now this should obviously also make sense to say 0 to 10. And now we have an additional classification that we added in there. You can also add in a new class there, but I just wanted this classification to be added in there, for example. And now again, you can click this symbol and edit the color. I'm going to do the white color. Okay, fine. And now I'll need to reclassify. I'm adding in one more class right now, and I'll click classify again, or maybe I even want 10 of them. And you'll see there will be 10 of them added in there. Usually you're fine with like 5 or something. In some cases you may want up to 7. And it kind of depends on your data set and the mode that you're using as well. I'll just use classify, apply, and OK, and use whatever I have right now. And now we actually have a pretty cool visualization. So as you can see, this area right here doesn't really have much cafes. And this area that is arguably not that much larger does have a lot of them. And let's zoom into another place. Same here. This one has cafes, this one doesn't. If you're still watching, you're really ahead of the game, because most people, they won't really watch this far. They don't really have the attention span to do so. So big up you, keep watching, and we'll next dive into printing. So this is our map right now. What we want to do next, for example, is maybe make a print. Let's click this button right here, and we'll make a print of this map. Now, obviously you can click your print screen button. You can use some sort of plugin and do it that way, but that's not ideal. What I would suggest you do is make a print in QGIS. So you can click project and you can click new print layout, and let's call it London as a print layout, and click OK. Make it full screen. And what you can do next is add your map. So click this button right here, add it on there, and it will start rendering, and that will be your print. Now you can make it full, or even put it within the boundaries. You even see the scale right here, and you can make edits. So for example, I only want to use this bit. I can add in a text, and I'll say whatever I want to say. So I can edit this, and I can say London, and maybe I want to make the text a little larger as well. You can do that by scrolling down a little, make the item, click the item properties, then click the size and make it like 50 or whatever you want to make it. And well, obviously there's a lot of other options there, but I'll just kind of keep it for this. And what we have right now is our layout. We can save this layout in case we want to use that same layout on another map, and you want to use the same layout as a print on each print that you make usually. But you can also export it as a PDF or SVG this way right here. I'll just keep that for whatever, because I don't really want to print right now. but that's something that you can do as well and that you need to be aware of. In that case, you have a static map, so it's no longer dynamic. That's the one disadvantage of printing it. It's going to be static, but take into account that you can make a static map still, even though everything right now is pretty dynamic. However, if you do want to keep a dynamic map, you can also use a web map. So what I can do next, for example, is use a plugin and export this to a web map. So what I'm doing right now is I'll click plugins, click manage and install plugins, and then go to QGIS to web. Select that, install it, just have it download. And one more thing about these plugins, this is the cool thing about QGIS and it being open source, right? If your colleague or maybe your colleague from a previous employer makes a cool plugin, you can actually build something with that plugin, because if they make it accessible for the entire community, which usually is the case, you'll actually be able to download or install that plugin as well. That being said, let's go into our QGIS to web plugin. It's this one right here, and we'll create a web map. I'll click leaflet right now, because, well, these are the two frameworks that you can use basically for displaying it. This is my preference usually, but choose either, it doesn't really matter. And you can make all sorts of changes right here, but honestly, it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to click export, and you'll just have a HTML file with your dynamic map in there. And as soon as you click something, it's also dynamic. So it actually has a pop-up with all of the information from the file that you have created. And you could use this HTML file in a web page or in a own application that you may want to build. And that's something that's just really cool. I'll move back into QGIS for now and actually close my windows. And then there's just one more thing I wanted to say. So we've actually covered a lot today. You actually know how to navigate QGIS, why even use QGIS. You know, there's web maps, there's static maps, there's different types of files. You can use vector data, raster data, you can do spatial analysis. You already can do a lot. So you understand a lot of QGIS in the basic sense. You can now actually make any map you put your mind to. So make sure that whenever you're stuck or you don't really know what to do, look up a tutorial, go to my community. It will be in the description down below. Completely free. You can ask your questions there. There's also this toolbox that you can use. There's documentation you can use. There's AI tools that you can use. So really make everything your own and make sure that you actually put your mind to the project that you're working on and actually build the thing you want to build. You can do anything now. You can pretty much do anything now, but you just need to actually put your mind to it. That's just the one thing I wanted to discuss now. All sorts of like advanced stuff that I may have missed right now surrounding like databases, surrounding web maps, programming, Python, are all things you can still do yourself. You can also join my community for that and ask more about that. Look up tutorials for that. Maybe you already have those skills. But I hope this has been a valuable video to you to actually navigate QGIS and whatnot. So that's been the 2025 QGIS edition. It's been the full guide. I hope it's been a valuable video to you, and I hope to see you in another one.